let's do this. Hi everyone, I'm Erin Los-Catraro. I am co-founder and CEO of She Should Run, and welcome. I want to welcome everyone here this evening. Thank you so much for joining us on this very, very rainy, cold day in DC. And for those of you who are joining us via live stream, what an important moment for us to gather and talk about where we go from here. I wanted to first just acknowledge how humbled we have been by the outpouring of support for our mission. It has been an incredible couple of weeks as we sort of regroup and think about next steps for She Should Run and how we inspire the next generation of women and girls to lead. Claire and I talk about the sort of the day after Election Day as one of those moments where it wasn't just that we had to redraft all of the emails, because we did, and the social media posts, that all had to happen, but it was this very real moment for us to pair that with the news that we made little to no gains in terms of women's representation from town halls all the way to the presidency. And we are now ranked, get ready for this, 99th in terms of representation of women's political leadership in this world. So we have a lot of work to do, and I wanted to give you a little bit of hope. So on that day after, as we were like heads on desks trying to figure out where to go from here, we started to get notifications of women who were stepping up and saying that they wanted to run for office. And those notifications, those trickles, it took us a couple hours to figure out this was happening. We're turning, frankly, into this fire hose effect. And since Election Day, we have seen over 4,500 women raise their hands to say they So it only makes the point more important that I want to thank all of you for your support in being here, and I want to thank the sponsors that made today possible. So those sponsors include our premier sponsors, Comcast and PG&E. Thank you so much for helping to bring this together. Our featured town hall sponsors, Aflac, Barbie, Deloitte, Dentons. Our gold reception sponsors, Facebook, IBEW, The Pink Ceiling, our board chair, Maggie Cavalaris, and her family, and the nearly 1,000 new donors that She Should Run saw. And those of you who have joined us new, thank you so very much. And I want to turn it over to the incredible Claire Bresnahan, our executive director, to talk a little bit about some of our programs.
Thank you, Erin. If there's one thing that we want you to take away from tonight, and I'm looking at all the folks who are on live stream too, is that we need you. Our country needs your leadership. And we're here to be a community for you. We have an incredible incubator that we launched this year. Is anyone here signed up for the incubator? Yeah, we got a few. Yeah, okay. That's right. So that's our place to be able to say that you can come as you are. Be who you are, do you. We've got your backs. The incubator is a place for you to be able to come and learn how to lay the groundwork for a future run for office. And if you don't believe me, you want to take my word for it, we've got an incredible video of 4 women who shared their stories with us on why they think that you, I'm trying to look at every single woman and folks on the
thing that you cannot do.
Run for office now. It is the best thing that you will ever do.
We can, we should, and we will.
Again, you can go to sheshouldraun.org/incubator. All their stories are up on Facebook too, where you can hear each individual woman's journey to running for office, why she made that choice. And with that, I'll say we're going to introduce our one and only moderator, Jess Moyner. Our dear board member and just incredible moderator that we had last year. Jess is changing cultural messages one brand at a time. From advising our Barbie's latest body evolution to Dove's memorable Real Women campaign, the results of her work behind the scenes have come to light over the years, making magnificent waves in terms of how we approach women, girls, and confidence. She is the CEO of Talk to Jess, a consulting and strategy firm that acts as the thought partner for companies who seek to change their messaging towards women and girls. In this role, she makes change from the inside out by partnering with brands and businesses to help shift the way we think, see, and talk about women and girls. Jess remains a driving force behind cultural change, serving as the Dove's global ambassador for self-esteem. She's the author of 2 best-selling books and has also done a recent TEDx talk on the confidence myth, which explores the messy, simple, and often overlooked myths about cultivating confidence. In her free time, Jess is also the adjunct professor at USC's Edinburgh School of Journalism, where she teaches personal branding and entrepreneurship. She also is an affiliated faculty member of their Media, Diversity, and Social Change Initiative headed by Dr. Stacy Smith. She has been recognized by Forbes magazine as one of the 14 powerful women to follow on Twitter and Inc. And Inc. magazine recently named her as 21 thought leaders every entrepreneur should follow in 2016. Please welcome Jess.
Hi, everybody. How are you?
Very good.
Oh, well, I've been thinking about this conversation for some time. And candidly, I thought we might be having a different conversation of sorts tonight. But I think the conversation that we're going to have is incredibly important, perhaps more important than ever before. I think as Erin and Claire were mentioning, for many people, the election was particularly traumatic. Okay, it's fair to say that? For some folks. We witnessed, though, a campaign that was somewhat built on misogyny and xenophobia and racism. And so when we were talking about how do we call those out when we see it, and then how do we build from there? How do we use what we saw and elevate it into a rallying cry for change? I think a lot of us who are questioning our safety, a lot of us who saw that women's bodies and their appearance were certainly fair game for media scrutiny and scrutiny from people who were running for office, it naturally made us worry about the future. And then when you layer on what Claire and Erin mentioned about the lack of progress that we made in establishing movement in the representation of women in politics, we have more work to do. We've been well aware of that for some time. And what I love and respect about tonight's conversation is that we will be solutions focused tonight. So while we are sitting on collectively and individually lots of different emotions and feelings and reactions, and many of us are still processing and figuring out how to organize and create movement, and a lot of us thinking about running for office, again, I think tonight is really how do we organize that into a rallying cry of action. So I think what you'll know about She Should Run, if you're a friend and if you're new to tonight, welcome. This is an opportunity for women to speak up and speak out, and for a lot of us to talk about what do we need to do to participate more in public service. If we want to see the system changed, we have to change the system. So as Claire and Erin were reading my bio, I work a lot with big companies and brands, those that have a major stakeholder position in talking to women and girls globally. And one of the things I learned early on as an activist, I've been an activist for women's issues for 22 years. I've been a social entrepreneur for that same amount of time. And what I learned was there was definitely movement that got made when there was external protest and there was activism from the outside in. And then over the last decade or so, working with large businesses and essentially large systems, what I figured out was that there's a lot of opportunity to change from within. So for us to have compassion, empathy, and understanding of the system will be one of the first steps for us to figure out how do we continue to change that. As also Erin mentioned, I think it's pretty incredible that She Should Run has had a 4,000%. Let me say that again. A 4,000% increase, right, in women joining their programs. And I think what we focus on a lot, and what we will tonight, especially in our first panel, is what does that impact mean then for the girls that are watching, and for the boys that are watching, but especially for the girls who are considering a path in public leadership one day. And right now we also know that there are many girls who are not interested in public office. Let's face it, it comes at a high cost, especially for women, and they see that. So what I want to remind us of tonight is that progress is not linear. And so what we're going to focus on tonight is how powerful we are together when we remain vocal and resilient, and that we have to continue to be active in shaping our public policy and leadership. But tonight's conversations in particular are going to talk about how girls have been impacted in their view of leadership, the role of women in business, and how can we take some best practices from successful business women and apply it into our governing sphere. And then more importantly, how do we tell stories in the media? How do we change this narrative around women and girls, around women in public positions and powerful positions, and the stories that we tell ourselves about our own power and our own ability to lead. I wanted tonight's conversations, and I think we've curated the panels to represent this, to be celebratory of the women who came before us, of the men who stand beside us, and the girls who are looking to us to lead the way. So again, tonight we'll be focused on honoring the legacy of those, and those who've been on some powerful journeys, and we're going to recognize and advance the cycle of progress by offering solutions tonight. So with that, I'd like to introduce you to our first panel. We had a little bit of a dropout, so we're going to wing it, because that's what we do best. So we wanted the first panel, in honor of this conversation of looking ahead, to really focus on looking again at the impact of girls. So how do girls, young women, as they're listening to the rhetoric in the media, as they're watching the first female presidential candidate run for office, as they're watching some of the fallout, and as they're considering their own roles, whether it's in student council, local government, or national government, how are they infiltrating some of those stereotypes? How are they challenging some of those stereotypes? And how are they handling all of that? So we're going to look at how this is impacting the next generation of girls. So I want to first introduce Sayu. So Sayu, do you want to come on up? We'll have you sit up here. Sayu is the founder of the New American Leaders Project, a movement that empowers first and second generation Americans to run for office. And she also has served as New York City's first Commissioner of Immigrant Affairs. Welcome, Sayu. And then joining us is Samantha Sullivan. Samantha, come on down. She's a junior at a School Without Walls high school. That's a really cool name, School Without Walls in Washington, D.C. She's currently serving her second term as the elected class president of her junior class. Badass. Samantha's been a Girl Scout for 11 years, is that right? 11 years, and she's a member at large of the board of directors of the Girl Scouts Council. And she is responsible for advising management on the financial and policy issues that help to shape that council's strategic plans. Excellent. And then here's my ringer for this evening. You might remember her from last year. She's my MVP VIP. Christian Harold, come on down. Christian is now 13 years old. And how many years have you held office at your school? 2. So Christian is going to talk a little bit tonight about her role in student council at her school and her passion for future public leadership. Is that right? Yes. Excellent. And then, have we seen Assemblywoman Gray come in yet?
We're going to say 5 minutes.
Okay, excellent. So she's going to join the panel in motion. And we got this, right, ladies? Okay. So I want to sort of okay. So Sayu, let me start with you. There's a lot of talk in culture about children, women, all of us can't be it if we can't see it, right? So we know that there's a lack of diversity in the state legislature, and I wanted to know if you could share some thoughts on how do you think this election will impact the number of first and second generation Americans considering running for office, and what do we do proactively to really close that gap as specifically as possible?
Sure. So first of all, it's great to be here. Thank you for having me. I'll say 2 things. One is that and it sounds like a cliche, but the truth is that there is an opportunity in other places, right? You've seen that at She Should Run with the increase in enrollment. We've definitely seen that in terms of people's interest in standing up, the Here to Stay sort of hashtag that has taken a lot of currency in the immigrant movement. Is a reality, right? It's a reality that's saying, we're not going to let people push us out, and that we need to stand up as leaders in order to have our communities feel that they have voices in government. But so that one point around the crisis being an opportunity, but I think there's another layer to this that is worth mentioning, particularly as it relates to young women and girls who may not be of age to run at least for public office. And that is the feeling, the message that we've gotten about our presence in the United States. Yes. And the questioning not just of our ability to run for office, but our very presence in the U.S., what people like me stand for in terms of the social justice movement is under threat. And so when you ask what we can do, I think that we need to be very, very cognizant that this is not just a political moment, but also a cultural identity moment. And that many of us who have often felt like we don't belong are hearing that message repeated. And so, when we make, my niece said to me the other day that there are these offhand comments that her classmates make, and that for them it's just a joke, and they don't even remember that they did it. But for her, it's a lifetime memory that her place in that school, in that city, is questioned. So I'd say, if we can be very cognizant of not making comments in passing about identity and who is American and who belongs, and then if we can really, there's the conversation about needing to ask women, right? But women of color who don't necessarily come with the political connections, perhaps that others might have, whether they're women or men, who don't come with the political knowledge, and so just kind of being cognizant that there's an intersectionality of gender with race and class and immigration status, and that we need to be ever more cognizant of that. We've seen that in the voting patterns, and we're definitely going to see it in the types of women who are going to step up to run.
It's interesting. My husband is from Mexico, and I was talking to our niece after this election result came out, and maybe a couple days afterwards, and she said to me, she's 17, and she said, I'm having a hard time feeling at home in my home. And that word home really resonated for me. The question of what is home, and how do first and second generation Americans have a changing relationship with the concept of home. And both, I also got a sense from her as a young woman that she was also talking about feeling at home in her body, that there was a sense of sort of a lack of safety that was happening for her. So she was hit on multiple levels. I'm throwing this out there, but just wondering if you could speak to that a little bit about how we have more, talk about intersectionality, and how do we have a holistic conversation about women in as a whole person, and not just their race or origin, and but their whole experience.
Yeah, I mean, I wish I had a pat answer for that. Yeah. It's a struggle that I think the women's movement generally has been grappling with for some time, right? And the one thing that I do often talk about as it relates to our work, which is training first and second generation Americans to run for office, that we need to really think about the spaces that we create as being inclusive, as not being just about building diversity. And I think that means that thinking from the very core of the idea about what it is that we're trying to achieve that represents all these needs, rather than creating an event, creating a training, creating a program, creating a conversation, and saying, oh, you know what, we actually need a Latina speaker, or we need an Asian American. How do we think about this political moment as a moment that's about a multiracial, multi-ethnic moment to build power, and that's not just about addressing multiple identities as kind of add-ons. Does that make sense? So
Yeah.
sort of thinking about it from the very central conception as being inclusive rather than just as an add-on.
Yes. Well, I think the difference, we talk a lot, and certainly in the corporate sphere, we talk a lot about diversity versus inclusivity. And I think Ava DuVernay said it the best when she said, diversity is sort of having a seat at the table, but inclusivity is having the power in that room to make the decision. And I would go even one step further in the conversation around culture and home and politics, which is the variety of voices that are needed. We talk about changing the system.
Right.
But recognizing that we can't continue to tokenize and cherry pick those voices, but to include and invite voices to the table. So I'm just curious, I guess, as we start off the conversation talking about how women and girls in particular are reacting to this current administration choice, is how do we talk to girls and women about everything that they've heard thus far about being a woman, and about body, and about image, and about the value that gets placed on women from an external perspective. When we're trying to get women to see themselves way beyond that, but we keep getting sort of reduced to being ratings, on our body or on our beauty. Just curious if you've had any conversations and with young people about how to kind of filter through some of that conversation.
It's interesting. So I can say that for first thing, just in terms of the Ava DuVernay point, I will also say that a phrase we've heard often, right? That if you're not at the table, you're on the menu. But to sort of, but I will say that what I talk about is that also you not only do you need to be at the table so that you're not part of the menu, but when you're at the table, the menu needs to be a different menu.
That's right.
Right? Because the conversation about policy for people who have my immigration experience or have someone's working class experience is a very different conversation. In terms of young people, the only story that I can share is that the first day, as many of us, we had to wake up and talk to our children, or maybe not wake up because we didn't sleep. And my daughter said to me, she's 10 years old, and she wants to be the first woman in the NBA because she doesn't think that the league should be separated by gender. And the thing she said is, what does this mean for my dreams? And so it was at this very personal level that she felt set back.
Yeah.
But then what we've seen in her school is that a number of organic conversations have come up in people's homes or have been set up. And what we had the young women who came to our home do, actually what they decided to do, we were not involved at all, they wrote letters to Hillary Clinton, they wrote letters to Donald Trump. I think we have to encourage people to continue to fight and to take agency and to give examples of the struggles that we've all been part of, because it's never really been easy, and we know that. But I think young people who are questioning, because I also think there's lots of young people who really have a good sense of things, but for those who are questioning, really kind of providing examples of what we've done and what other young people are doing to push back and to continue to be who we need to be in our fullest way.
Well, you're sitting next to two of those women
Yeah,
tonight. That I'm certain
very
of.
careful.
That is I'm certain of. So Samantha, how closely did you follow the election process?
I followed it pretty closely.
Yeah.
We were talking a lot about it at my school and also in my house.
So I'm just curious about how that might have impacted your future vision for leadership. Did you doubt? Are you more inspired? Where do you stand now?
Well, I would say it definitely throughout the whole election process, it was really inspiring, because I know when I decided to run for office at my school as class president, I was really unsure because I didn't really have any role model to base my presidency off of, because I didn't see anybody that really looked like me at my school, like being a class president. And so I found as in my elected office, I had to kind of carve out a place for myself. And it was a lot of being unsure about, is this being too assertive? Is this my role? And I think throughout the whole election, seeing Hillary Clinton being very assertive and moving so many people with her speeches and at debates, it was really powerful for me, and it kind of gave me more confidence.
How do you feel about when women, a lot of times when young women in particular, and women in general, are assertive and ambitious, we get labeled, we get called the lovely B word and others. Have you experienced that in your young time of running, and how have boys, girls, school, how have they reacted for you having the ambition to run and hold public office?
I know at my school, I'm fortunate to go to like a very liberal and open school where everyone is really encouraging. So I haven't really faced that much negativity towards me, but I definitely feel like there have been times when I myself worried about being too assertive, and I might get some feedback that, oh, like she thinks that she's better than us, or she can boss us around. And I definitely don't think there would be as much of that if I was a boy, just because that's kind of the natural place, and it's seen more as being a positive assertive versus a bossy. And so I think as I've been class president for 2 years, my peers have kind of gotten to know me and say, oh, that's just Samantha. But I think it definitely was hard at first, and I have experienced some kind of negative pushback against being assertive.
And how do you handle that? Like, what do you say to yourself? Who do you go and talk to specifically? Like, what are some of the tools that you might use to get yourself out of that? Because we can all go down that rabbit hole, whether it's not about running for office, but if we've presented something in front of other people and we're worried about judgment, or we've had some sort of rejection in some way, or we've put ourselves out there, I think we can all sort of spiral. I'm curious what tools you've cultivated.
I think the most direct thing I've done is just talk to people who I know will support me and what I'm doing, because I definitely have doubts over whether I'm being too assertive when I do certain things, and some people I can talk to are like my friends. Also, my mom is a really big role model for me because she's a leader in a lot of parts of her job. And then also, even on kind of a larger scale, looking at politicians like Hillary Clinton, just looking at speeches and saying like, wow, it has such positive feedback. It's not being aggressive at all.
What would be too aggressive when you say acting too aggressive? What does that look like? Hello.
Yay!
We've been waiting for you. What does that look like when you say too aggressive? I just want to kind of describe that in your mind, what that means.
I think, I guess the preconceived notion I had was just not being too direct almost and telling people what to do. Saying, and kind of, there's always kind of a fine line I feel like I have to walk between suggesting things and saying, so how would you feel about doing this, rather than saying, do this.
Don't we know it? The soft sell. There is a big difference in the way men and women present that assertion. Christian, did you have any concerns running for office for the first time about being alienated from your friends, or being perceived as being too bossy or too assertive, or any of those kinds of concerns?
I mean, I think all women can face that when running for an office. Like, people often take things as the double standard, and they put, well, she's just being too bossy. And when a man do it, they'll be like, oh, well, he's a leader. Let him go ahead and do that. But I felt like I got a lot of support from my friends, from my family. Unfortunately, I didn't know the people that She Should Run yet, but I think that if I ran now, they would definitely support me.
Yes. I think so. I think that's safe to say.
But I've been lucky. I mean, I haven't faced a lot of rejection or struggle when running for elected office, or just even going for something as simple as trying out for the lead in a school musical. I've always had so much support, and I wish that all women could have this, because there are so many people telling so many women that they can't run. But the thing that I've learned is that the only person stopping you from doing something is yourself. Or in my case, if you're 13, your mom from giving you a ride.
Although luckily you've got kind of the greatest parents on the planet.
I do.
So, but yeah, you are correct.
I remember once, I do track and field, and I was doing a hurdles race. And I remember I fell down right in the middle of the race. And out of the 4 people, I got back up, and I still came in 3rd. That just goes to show you that even if you have an obstacle, or you feel like you can't get around something, you will succeed if you just keep on trying and if you get back up again.
Told you, she's a ringer, but she's welcome. This is Assemblywoman Maria Rodriguez-Gregg. We saw her in the video. She represents the 8th Legislative District of New Jersey, and she is the first Latina Republican to be elected to the New Jersey State Legislature. Welcome. So, when I was doing my homework on you, I was so fascinated with the journey to politics, because you started out as a dental assistant.
Yes.
And
aggregate of things. It wasn't one specific aha moment. I got involved with the local county Republican organization, the Burlington County Young Republicans. And prior to that, my family, they were a military family. We always were interested. We were always engaged. They talked about politics all the time. It affected them greatly, considering that many of our officials could decide whether or not they would get deployed. And so it was always a conversation at the table. And my father urged me to get involved locally. I guess we were having a conversation about local politics, and we realized, everybody talks about politics and government on a national, federal level, and we forget how greatly your Board of Education can affect your property taxes and things of that nature. So we realized that we were pretty ignorant of that, and we got involved. My father got involved as well, and I went from there. And then as I got involved, as I got to meet other legislators, other county officials, municipal electeds, just everyone from every walk of life, I became more engaged, more interested. I wanted to have more of a say and thought that I should.
It's incredible. We were talking, before you arrived, we were talking a little bit about the kind of the reaction from this election cycle on how women in particular and girls felt portrayed or talked about in the media, whether it was about rating appearances for women or just hearing some of the kind of the vitriolic rhetoric around women in general and power. And so just wanting to give you a chance to weigh in your journey thus far too, now that you're in it and you're serving, if you've encountered any of that kind of pushback, or in this election cycle in particular, if you notice that young women in your life were particularly impacted by the way we talk about women in leadership.
I think for me, this election was definitely eye-opening for a lot of people. I think for many people it's always been there, but maybe they didn't see it day to day. It didn't seem as pervasive. I mean, some of the conversation was escalated to the point of absurdity when it came to women in government. And so for me, in my path, it was actually pretty positive. Yes, have I dealt with comments about my looks? Yes, it was easy to just brush aside. It was easy to assert myself and say, don't talk to me that way, or are we going to have a problem? And, Jersey, but I always felt confident in asserting myself. Like, I heard you talking about you feel like you have to be a certain way, you feel like you can't be as aggressive. When I was first selected to run and decided that I was going to take that step, one comment that I always held near and dear was someone told me to just be yourself. No matter what, don't think you need to be what a politician is, don't think you need to be anything but yourself. Be yourself, be true to yourself, and that's all you have to be. And I am a bit aggressive. I am passionate. I do stand up for myself. I am assertive, and I'm very matter of fact. And so I stayed true to that. And so yes, if a guy said something that I thought was unbecoming, I told him straight up, no. Are we gonna have a problem? And and they were like, no. And I think they weren't used to that, and I wasn't afraid of the pushback. And I think sometimes we're afraid that, well, if we don't stand up for ourselves, or if we do stand up for ourselves, someone's going to put more barriers in our way. You'd be surprised. Most people will step back. More people than not, at least in my experience. And so this certainly was an interesting election in that way. I think people saw it more than they expected.
Yeah, and the reason that I keep asking this in various forms for this panel is I think as you watch the progression of the conversation today, we talk about being solutions focused, unless we actually call out what it is, define it, describe it, validate it, so that there's not a lot of gaslighting going on. We're all kind of wondering, was that what really was going on? I feel like the more we can name it, the next generation can see that as an example, to know it, right, and to define it. So you talk about barriers, and I'm curious, as you now look to the next generation, you've got two sitting next to you, you've got folks in the incubator program here tonight. What do you think some of the real barriers will be for young women to get into politics, and any thoughts on how we continue to address those head on?
I think the biggest barrier is exactly what you said. It's really ourselves. I mean, we're the ones that we put all of these ideas in our head that, well, there's going to be this issue. People are going to talk about me this way. People may comment. We see, like, for example, on a greater scale, Hillary Clinton. We see some of the comments that were directed her way. We even see it with Megyn Kelly, who is a news reporter, anchor for Fox. We see some of the comments that were said her way when she ask a question that someone deems inappropriate. And I think that we think, well, someone's going to talk to us that way, or if that's the type of criticism we're going to get, I'm not going to be able to fundraise, I'm not going to be able to do this. We put a lot of it in our own head, and I think sometimes you're really creating your own barriers. You really just have to take that step. And, and it's anecdotal, but I think science backs it up. I think more women are problem solvers. And I've noticed the women that I've worked with, we tend to be more focused on finding solutions. So I think having that attitude, you'll be able to figure it out. I think that one of the bigger barriers, though, is really women need those resources. This is an excellent program. It's the lack of resources. Okay, well, how do I go about this? I think there are so many women that want to, and maybe they're not putting the barriers in their mind, but they don't have the resource. They don't have that direction. So really finding that direction, latching onto other women electeds or women behind the scenes that understand how campaigns are run, how to move forward, what resources are out there, how to build your network. I think having those resources are more of what's needed to get women ahead.
Excellent. So we're live streaming tonight, and we asked the audience at home to kind of send in questions or to share some questions that they have. And so one that I want to end the panel on, open for anybody to jump in. When we talk about what impacts the next generation's perception of running for office, let's say, of any level, local or state or federal. So how do we, the question was, according to this new Stanford University study about the majority of middle schoolers who cannot tell the difference between real news and sponsored content, this is impacting perhaps some of the perception of what's real and what's not real. So what are the dangers of this fake news cycle, and what kind of conversations should we maybe be having with young people about determining what is real and what is unreal in the news that they take in? And so I wanted to maybe actually throw it to Samantha and Christian just to say, have you had conversations like this with your friends about what's a fake news site, what's a real news site, how they're talking about women in those sites? I'm just curious if that's even on the radar right now in your worlds.
I know that I've talked a lot with my friends about the election that's happened. We've definitely talked about the media in terms of the language they use, but also which media sources are credible or might be biased in some way. But I definitely think more could be done at the school level of talking about that.
Interesting.
Because I know that it varies based on if you're really politically active, you might talk about it, but if you're not, then you have no idea what's really happening. So I think it's a lot of the teachers and maybe even the school administration's jobs.
Okay. Any thoughts on that, Christian?
Yeah, definitely. I'm in speech. I'm on the speech team at my school, and so we call unreliable sources sketchy. And so there are a lot of sources that I know that aren't necessarily reliable, and I know to stay away from those, but I know that not everyone has the same experience, and all I can say is it's all about exposure. It's all about teaching girls, how to know, what news to watch, how to, tell the difference between biased news and unbiased news. It's all about education. I'm doing an oratory right now, which is a speech that is given memorized for 10 minutes, about why people are so afraid to associate with the feminist movement. And one of my main reasons is that they're not educated. There was a study, and it said that a majority of men and women said that they support the feminist movement when given the definition of feminism, but only a fraction of those same men and women said they supported the feminist movement without that education, without that definition. So really, it's all about educating our girls on what the current events are. That way they can be educated, and when they do get into the world of politics, they know exactly what to look for.
So in case you were wondering, you guys, we're going to be just fine. Okay? Just take it down a notch. Anxiety meds for this evening. The future is in really good shape for Sayu and Assembly Woman. I'm just curious, anything else to add about what do we leave last tips of advice for young girls who might be watching, young women in the audience today, about following their passion, getting involved, listening to a little bit of that spark, getting educated? What else would you add to our tips of advice?
So I think if there's one thing that this election cycle taught us is that it actually is possible to run for office no matter how it's the grammatically correct way of saying that, no matter how unqualified you are. So and in all seriousness, realizing how much you already have to offer, and that running for office is largely about being passionate about your community and wanting to create change for your community in this particular way. And then the rest of it just comes.
Excellent. Anything else?
I would just say that for a lot of the women out there, and the young women out there that are considering getting involved, if you care about making change, if you want to see more women get ahead, you have to take that step yourself. You can't keep waiting for other people to do it for you. To take that step, start building your network now. Start latching on to mentors. Ask for mentorship. Ask for people to help you. We talk about fake news cycles. It's not just how to differentiate. It's taking the step to actually look it up. Is this, we have smartphones. Is this real? Is this fake? It's not that hard to research. It's not that hard. We have so much at our fingertips. Be assertive and put yourself out there. Look for those opportunities and those avenues. As you can see, anyone from any background can run. Yeah. Qualifications are, it really is what people believe is, what they believe is qualified. It's what people trust. People want to trust in someone. People want to feel like this person understands where I'm coming from in my situation. And so, put yourself out there because anyone can.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean anyone can be great at it.
Yes. Christian, last comment.
What I have to say is to all the young women and even the older women out there, do not give up. This election is not the last election in American history. It's not the first election. While it's the first election where a woman has been nominated, do not say that it's the last. There is still hope in America. And do not let what this man has to say go straight to your head. Because none of it is true. Women are not just pieces, their bodies are not just pieces of meat. You can do anything you accomplish, and we just have to step up and do something about it. Today I was walking with my friend Sophia to lunch, and she was complaining about something. And I just looked at her straight in the face and said, then do something about it. And she said, what? And I was like, do something about it. Like, if you're complaining about it, then do something about it. And while my friend is great, don't be like her in this situation. Do something about it, and don't give up.
Amen! All right, so we're going to move on to our next speaker. Thank you guys so much for joining us tonight. So in between these panels, we're going to have fabulous solution speakers. And so I feel so grateful to share with you our next one. I'm really grateful that when I emailed, she said yes. She's very busy. I'm going to introduce you to my friend Natalie Molina-Nino. I don't know if anybody heard about a little musical called Hamilton. So she was involved in the early stages of Hamilton. So this is one thing I'm going to tell you about Natalie. She's an absolute early adopter. There's no doubt if you want to know what's going to be coming up in trends and sort of forecasting our future, this is the woman who knows it. But she spots authenticity as clearly as anybody that I know. So she had a little role in helping to sort of bring that world to life. And she's a serial entrepreneur. She's a software engineer turned tech founder, turned playwright, turned nonprofit founder. And now her new venture, as though she needs another title, is Brava Investments. And if they succeed in what they're setting out to do, and she's going to tell you more about that, we may all be in the driver's seat of a whole new revolution in the way that women lead and the way that women fund leadership. And so Natalie's going to talk to us a little bit about the importance of our values aligning with our businesses and how we can actually empower women to invest in themselves first. My friend Natalie.
It started as a Facebook rant, so I made my notes.
Okay, okay, we'll get you your, sorry, Allie, let's bring that back out.
But you're going to stay here?
I'm going to hang out. I feel kind of chairs comfy. I'm just do you mind if I like stalk you?
If you're behind me, it'll feel a little
all right.
And then we'll do a conversation. You can interrupt me.
Okay,
perfect. All right, good. You're not going to come back?
Oh, you want me to come down? Listen, we're bossy, we're assertive, we're aggressive. All right.
And I want you to pitch in if you want to at any moment, please. All right, so it really did start as a Facebook rant, but now it's going to be a talk. 2186. Does anybody have any guesses about what 2186 is? The year 2186? Anyone? Yes, yeah. Since we're live streaming, probably some of that doesn't get, come through the speakers, but it is. It's the World Economic Forum. They released a new report last month. And what they said is that they're forecasting that, to quote, it'll take 170 years to eradicate the disparity in pay and employment opportunities for men and women.
Yep.
Meaning that it could take until the year 2186, 170 years to close the opportunity gap. I know we have some younger than 18 in the room, but I think we can all agree that that's horseshit. I'm an incredibly impatient person, and I think that when it comes to gender parity and when it comes to investing in women, I feel really strongly that we've been really doing it wrong, basically. We've been doing a lot of things right, but if that 170-year window tells us anything, is that we haven't been doing enough of those right things. And so I'll tell you a little bit about my story. I'm an immigrant kid who learned to code. Is Reshma Sajani here? Or she will be. Okay, great. So near and dear to my heart, what Reshma does with teaching girls to code. I spent 15 years in tech, and then I spent 5 years building a center for women entrepreneurs at Barnard College. And today I'm an investor with a company that we launched last month called Brava. My focus is business, but my family are half Colombian, half Ecuadorian. My Colombian family are a political family. My Ecuadorian family are an entrepreneurial family. And so at our dinner table, there were definitely no rules about not talking about politics. And then this idea of bringing your work home, it was a requirement. It wasn't something that we avoided. I like to say that I got my MBA at the dining room table. But my family and I are super fortunate. We no longer have to worry about the basics. I grew up in the sweatshops of Los Angeles, so there was definitely a time where it was very different. My dad eventually owned his own factory, and then my mother, so that through the ups and downs of entrepreneurship, we always had health insurance, did the backbreaking work of being working the cash register at a big retailer for over 20 years. And so when I read about gender parity today, the stories that I see are predominantly about women that are left out at the top, right? We're talking about the C-suite, we're talking about the White House, we're talking about the corner offices. But when I think about gender parity, I'm really thinking more about people like my mom, people who chose, like her, to forego college so that I didn't have to, right? So my company, at the end of the day, was founded out of this concern, this idea that women often out of the corner office get left out of the headlines. And I'm worried most about those women, right? And I love that the previous panel talked about intersectionality, because ultimately this is intersectionality in action, right? I'm worried about women like my mom 30 years ago who might not even be in a room like this one today because she's busy working 3 jobs and could possibly make it into a room like this, right? Fundamentally, I would say, given things like this 170-year number, I care about accelerating change. I care about shrinking that number. And I guess what I'm here to say is that I think this is why business is really key to this. When I co-founded the Center for Women Entrepreneurs at Barnard at the Athena Center was already doing really good things in the world of corporate, in the arts. We had founded the Athena Film Festival, so we were already telling the stories of women in media. And then in partnership with both the White House and the White House Project, at the time founded by Marie Wilson, we were doing work with women in politics as well. But as an entrepreneur, my argument was, if we really want to level the playing field for women entrepreneurs, or for women, at large, we have to focus on the root causes. And my thought and my logic was, if we create successful women in business, they're going to create the next big corporations, and they're going to do it on their own terms. They're going to, fund the arts. And if we do our job well enough, they're going to fund political campaigns, and hopefully they're going to roll up their sleeves, run for office, and fund their own political campaigns. So this was my logic, and that was the premise behind the creation of the center. And I did that work for 5 years, and I think it's good work. I'm proud of it, no regrets. But 170 years remains the number, right? And I remain an impatient person. So where I am now is, if you're in the business of accelerating change the way that I am, and if you're in the business of doing it at a massive scale, you really cannot afford to limit the pool of possibilities. In other words, I think that this problem requires all hands on deck. And I think that means men and women. Yep. And so what that means is that at my company, and remember, my company, it's called Brava Investments, and we focus on investments that create outcomes for women. At my company, we actually don't care about the gender of the founders. I care about the outcomes, not about the optics. And so I'll explain a little bit more what that means. I spent the last 5 years, again, supporting women entrepreneurs. And in the process, I got to work in the trenches with amazing people. Pipeline Angels, the founder of Starvest, a $500 million VC fund, Sally Krawcheck, and so many other women that are doing this sort of on-the-ground work of investing in women entrepreneurs. And I'm never going to stop supporting women entrepreneurs. I'm a woman founder. This is not something that I will ever give up on, but I do think that a complex problem requires more than a single solution. And simply focusing on women founders, to me, feels like one part of a very complex solution. And so to shrink those 170 years, my thought is that yes, we have to go from top down. We have to worry about those corner offices and those C-suite women, but we also have to look at from the bottom up, sideways, diagonal, I don't care. We have to look at it from all sides, is my idea. And the reality today is that when we talk about gender parity in business, we've let the corner office completely monopolize the conversation, which has to do with business and it has to do with the media as well. Recently, McKinsey and Lean In released a report about gender parity. And the headline was, women account for just 18% of C-level employees, and women of color hold a mere 3% of C-suite jobs. It's awful, and it absolutely needs to be named and addressed, but it's not the full story. The reality is most women aren't losing sleep over whether they'll make it to the C-suite. Most women are worried about making rent, about paying for school, about being able to pay for medical bills. And so when we talk about investing in women, the same thing is true. Too often the conversation is not about investing in women in politics. It's not about women starting their careers. It's about investing in venture capital. That has dominated the conversation. You Google investing in women, you're going to get a bunch of articles about VC. And the reality is that women do get a pathetic amount of venture capital. The studies vary, but they're all in the single digits. It's 3%, it's 4%, it's 6% of venture capital, whatever. It's ridiculous. And it's important, and thank goodness that we're talking about it. But if you're a woman today in a situation like my mom was 30 years ago, you are not losing sleep because you didn't close your Series A, your Series B, or your Series C. We've created basically a bubble. And I feel like we've created a bubble that allowed the headlines about gender parity and about investing in women to be entirely about the corner office. And so my point is that even though those positions matter, and even, especially in the positions where women have been able to make it to that corner office, we also have to think about what those women and what those corner offices look like. They look white. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about that, right? Gender parity, and this is, I guess, fundamentally my point, cannot be exclusively about white women in corner offices. And what's more, it can't just be about women. And so, let's say some dude develops a software, right, that helps diagnose breast cancer faster and saves lives and money. I don't actually care if the founder is a guy, right? This company is going to measurably change both the health and the economic lives of millions of women potentially, which means that they're probably going to get my money, right? Or if you're starting a company that's buying up sweatshops, right? And in those sweatshops, you're eliminating slave labor, you're improving working conditions, you're paying living wages, and you're making good money in the process. You've created a real good business. I'm not investing in you because you're a woman founder. I'm investing in you because 90% of your workers in your factory are women, right? And so you're changing the economic lives of thousands and thousands of women, which is why I would invest in that company, right? And so what I care about ultimately is putting more money in the wallets of as many women as possible. I care about economies of scale, really. And in the US, women make up 52% of the population, and we make 70% of all household spending decisions. In the US, $2 to $4 trillion would be injected in the economy if we achieve gender parity by 2025. $2 to $4 trillion into the economy. And so I want to get the message out there that this is not philanthropy. When you're investing in a woman running for office, when you're investing in a woman starting off in her career, it is not philanthropy. It is damn good business. Yes. Simple. And it's also what I call the long game, which especially after an election result like we saw this month, the long game is really, really critical, right? This is why I care less about making one woman a billionaire, and I care more about making 1 billion women financially independent. And so I feel like we need all hands on deck. I feel like we need everyone. We don't just need women founders. And we can't lose sight of the C-suite. Of course, I'm not saying the C-suite isn't important, and we cannot give up on the C-suite any more than we will ever give up on the White House. But now more than ever, I think we have to look beyond the corner office, and I think we need to talk about women on the corner selling empanadas, right? I think investing in women has to include investing in all women at all levels, in business and in civic life. And whether you're focused on women in politics, whether you're focused on women-led businesses, or if you're like me and you're focused on companies that are impacting women economically, there's no one way to do this, I guess is my point. I want us to focus on outcomes. I want us to talk about real measurable outcomes. And to do that, I feel like we really need everybody. And that means we need all of you. And we don't need you in 170 years. We don't even need you in 170 days. I feel like we need you right now. And it doesn't matter if you work in corporate, if you work in the public sector. I think at the end of the day, whether you own your own business or you're an investor, and if you're an investor, call me. Or even if you're just a concerned consumer and you refuse to use Uber because their track record with rape is not something that you find acceptable. These are the sorts of decisions that tell me that there are so many different ways to invest in women and to shrink those 170 years. And fundamentally for me, I think the question that we need to be asking ourselves is really simple. It's the question that I ask myself every morning, which is, how am I investing in women, all women, every single day?
Perfect segue into our next panel. Like, I have nothing to add because you killed it. Sorry, I said you effing killed it. Everybody's heard it, but
No, we can put that up, right?
no, it's fine. It's the least offensive thing I may say tonight. So I want to now bring up our next panel because that was like the perfect segue from looking at how we're going to reframe some of this conversation. So in this next panel, we want to explore, we know that the economy, as Natalie mentioned, played a huge role in this election cycle, with both sides promising more jobs and a brighter future for the middle class. Women have become the fastest growing segment of entrepreneurs. However, in certain industries, they're the least funded. And so on this panel, we want to talk a little bit about the economic and political landscape for leaders. And I think I'd add into what Natalie just added, and our panel can do so as well. How do we keep at the forefront how we're investing in all women? So let me introduce our next panel. Is Maria here? Yes. Maria, okay. Oh, perfect. Hi, Maria. Maria Arias, come on down. She is the Vice President of Diversity and Inclusion for Comcast. She works closely with over 40 national civil rights, community, and business leaders to strategize and implement diversity and inclusion in areas such as programming and community investment. And then we have my friend Deneen Milner here with us tonight. Deneen, come on down. She is a New York Times best-selling author. She's penned over 23 books, including Straight Talk, No Chaser, and Act Like a Lady, Think Like a Man, co-written with Steve Harvey. She is the founder of MyBrownBaby.com, a critically acclaimed blog that examines the intersection of parenting and motherhood through a multicultural lens. She also has her own imprint, which we're going to get into in this conversation as well. She's a powerhouse. And then is Reshma here? Yeah. Reshma! Wonderful. Reshma Sujani is our board member and the founder of Girls Who Code. She's an attorney and activist and the author of Women Who Don't Wait in Line, a book that advocates a new model for female leadership. Fortune magazine, hey girl, has called her most recent TED Talk, Teach Girls Bravery, Not Perfection, as one of the most inspiring TED Talks, ever, and encourages us to raise a generation of women who are fierce. So, hi fierce panel. Okay, so let's just jump in. I'm going to start with you, Maria. We're going to talk a little bit about your role in Comcast in particular, and I want to talk about a large company like that. How do you work to ensure that women's issues remain a top priority, making them relevant for business and for the employees? And then kind of what is needed when you're attracting, retaining, and maintaining and developing female talent and helping them get to that next level?
Absolutely. Well, one of the things that we've done at Comcast NBC Universal is make sure that our program focuses on all communities. And one of the great things about our programs for women is that they cut across all communities. Our programs are really looking at all levels. We're a very complex company. We're a leading media and technology company. So on the NBC Universal side, we have 22 different business units. On the Comcast side, we have primarily the cable and broadband unit. Every part of our business has different puts and takes and different issues. So the roles for women in one company are very different. And I think one of the things that's really helped us make some progress over the past 5 years since we launched our program is to dig into the data and to look at the numbers and see where we have a lot of women in the pipeline and where we don't. We're a company that has over 20,000 technicians, while most of our technicians are male. So to Natalie's point, it's not just about the C-suite, but how do we get more women at the entry level, particularly since so much can be done with software and it's not such a physical job anymore. Development programs are really important. Sponsorship, mentorship, dotted line relationships are something that we're doing more and more at our company. So for example, Brian Roberts, our CEO, has 2 women who report to him and another one of our C-suite leaders, David Cohen, our Senior Executive Vice President and Corporate Diversity Officer. So we look at all that, and you have to see people like you across the organization. So just like we need women with P&L responsibility in our businesses, we need to see women anchors, we need to see women leads, we need to have women who are directors and producers, as well as actresses in our films, and we have to have theme parks in all parts of our business. So we really look at a multifaceted approach in terms of the metrics and the data, and then work very directly with our individual business units across the company in partnership with our HR leaders.
So I'm going to throw out a question. We didn't plan this one, but you're inspiring me to ask this. So working within entertainment companies in particular around D&I is something I'm passionate about and I do in Los Angeles. And I'm curious, just from the inside, how do you maintain, you said something so profound for me, which is like we need to see people that look like us around the company. And when there's not, when you know you're in a company or a business, anybody sitting here, where you know there's not that fair representation or equal representation, I'm wondering like if you have any advice on what you can say to raise that question in a way that is inclusive, not alienating, but again, goes and names it and really talks about the importance of it. Because I find a lot of executives who care about this D&I issue have a hard time figuring out how to address it when they know that there's a disparity there.
Yeah, I think that's a great question because one of the things in order to be successful, whether it's in business or politics, is you have to be willing to take risks. I'll never forget when I was tapped to build this program and I worked with my HR partners across the company to get the numbers. And a very senior HR leader said to me, Maria, the numbers? And I said, the numbers are what the numbers are. There's only one way, hopefully, to go, and that's up. And so I think one of the things that's been very successful, because I have a counterpart at NBC Universal, Craig Robinson, who I work with very closely, and his team, and we each within our spheres of influence work very directly with our business unit leaders and speak to them one-on-one about where there are gaps, where there's opportunities. We try to very effectively use our relationships with our national civil rights organizations. We have a 41-member external diversity council that includes both business leaders as well as most of the major national civil rights organizations and also leaders from media organizations, and we tap into them for pipelines. Our company also has internal executive diversity councils that get the numbers. So I think it's about having the dialogue and addressing the issue. But I'll tell you, there's the formal meeting in corporate America, but to me, I think the progress is the one-on-one relationship. Yes. And when I first took my role, I'll never forget, like when I'd see a very high-level individual in the hall, it was like, he would dart that way. Now, when we see each other, he comes up to me, how's it going? What can I do? What can I do to help? To me, that's progress. And meeting and knowing your company or your community or your legislature, just knowing what it is. We're a numbers company. We measure everything. And so one of the things that was very effective for us was being transparent internally as well, painfully transparent, and ranking. Business units against each other, divisions against each other, and because we're so hyper-competitive in a collegial way, though, that really got a lot of dialogue going, and then meeting individually again. First, we went to them, And now we're actually literally scheduling the requests that are coming into us because people realize to have sustainable progress, it's incremental. You may, you're not going to hit it out of the park immediately, or if you do, that's great, but are you going to be able to sustain it? And for me, it really is, as someone mentioned, the long game, because I would rather see slow and sustainable progress than to like go up 10% and then have a huge drop off. And I mean, I'd like to address the issue of, in order to achieve, you have to include the majority. You have to work with them. They are our sponsors. The role of male allies is really important, white or non-white. And it's so great to see women helping each other, because I got to tell you, I've been in the workforce for 30 years, and there was a time when my allies were men, not women. So kudos to this organization and to other organizations that are really focused on it, because it takes everybody being involved, because everybody has something to offer.
Agreed. So between the data and the dialogue and the risk-taking, I wanted to ask you, Janine, as a business owner and as an entrepreneur, I wanted you to kind of bring us to a personal piece of when you've had to make some of those risk-taking decisions in your business as you build your business, right? Because all of us entrepreneurs know we're like building and making stuff up as we go along, and we're learning from all of those experiences. And so I know that you had a particular experience where you felt as you were building your empire, and it is an empire, where it was threatened by somebody wanting to come in and kind of take a percentage ownership of that.
Yes. Okay.
And I wanted to talk a little bit about, because you and I talk, we meet on a number of levels, but one of the things that I love about you, and as a writer and as a journalist and as a creator, is that you own your own imprint, and you're owning the publication of those stories. What happens though in that success where somebody gloms on and says, I want a little of that? If you can talk a little bit about the risks that you've had to take to protect the empire that you're building.
Sure. So I work hard every day to do what I do. I don't transcribe for celebrities. I take my interviews with them and I turn them into art. I've written 25 books. I have 2 more coming out next year on my own imprint. And the name of my imprint is Deneen Milner Books, and it's a children's imprint I call them love letters to Black children who don't get to see themselves in their full humanity, I think, in children's books. So when you pick up a book about Black children, you usually see stories about slavery or civil rights movement or some kind of jazz icon or sports icon. And I think that Black children should be able to, see stories where they're thinking about the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus and losing their first tooth and taking their first bus ride to kindergarten. Those stories are important to my children. I don't talk to them about slavery before they go to sleep at night. So, because I didn't see it happening very much anywhere else, I decided to go ahead and do it myself. But that's something that I've always done. I have a background as a political reporter, a political journalist in New York. Got tired of seeing that sausage made, and decided to be an editor, an entertainment editor, and wrote my first book while I was a political reporter, and then just decided I was going to move from New York to Snellville, Georgia, so that I could take care of my kids the way that I wanted to, but also to build my own business of writing books, freelancing, and my blog, mybrownbaby.com, which is examines the intersection of parenting and race. And it's done extremely well. That blog managed to, and I hate when people call it a mommy blog, because it kind of devalues what we're doing.
Yes, and the work involved. That blog, that mommy blog, sustained my family in 2011 when I didn't have a book deal, the first time in 20 years that I hadn't had a book deal. And I actually made more money blogging than I did at some of my book deals. And it was from talking to people who think about the same things that I do and my girlfriends do, and being able to create a space for Black women in particular, who often don't get invited to the table, I think, until you want to talk about sort of the bad things. Let's talk about poor educational outcomes, or let's talk about welfare, or let's talk about
whatever negative thing you could possibly associate with women, then let's ask the black girl. But, you know, like, we have something to offer that's beyond that. And so I did extremely well with this blog, caught the attention of this guy who had run some successful websites that were kind of sort of pop culture kind of based. We talk about those websites that you know, aren't necessarily factual.
Make you feel a little.
That was right. That make you feel kind of crazy. He had a website like that and was looking to do something different and positive. And he caught sort of sight of my website and wanted to partner. And I was excited because I'm like, I do this every day by myself, and I need some help. And so he offered this help in exchange for 45% of my company. And I'm like, I'm sorry. That's a lot. And I did consider it because I did need the help, but the way that he sort of interacted with me didn't feel right. It didn't feel right here. It was almost like he was expecting me to be someone other than I am, and thought that I should accept that he talked to me in a certain kind of way, that he dealt with people in a certain kind of way, that he felt like he had to run his business in a certain kind of way. And that didn't sit right with me. And I just knew that it would be disaster later on, and so I walked away and said no.
Amazing. And never had a regret about that.
Not one.
Yeah. So, right, it's like Mother Maya says, when people show you who they are the first time, you believe them.
There it is.
And so I think as in women in business, whether it's sitting in that room deciding, do I want to say something when I see inequity, or whether you're running your business and you're engaged in an interaction that just doesn't feel right, that intuition and that instinct is so important. And it is something that women have at a deep and wonderful level, but it's also one of the first things we let go of, right? As we hear all those other voices kind of coming in. Reshma, I want to talk about that because as we go deeper into this conversation, we talk about that internal voice, that fear of failure, and the way that we embrace risk and how we assess that as we're young women, but also as we're growing women, figuring this out as we go along. But taking a risk, as Maria mentioned earlier, is essential in entrepreneurship and politics in life. I thought maybe you could talk a little bit about your journey and what advice you give women who are considering entering public service or business. How do we practically conquer those fears and accept that failure will be a part of our story, and in fact it should be?
Yeah, and that it's liberating.
Yeah.
I was definitely one of those girls that was raised, and I did a TED Talk on this, about being perfect, right? Went to the best schools, got all A's, said my please and thank yous, made everybody feel good, put my feelings last and everybody else's feelings first. And, I thought that if I lived my life that way, that I would then be successful. And I found myself at age 33, after I'd gone to Harvard and Yale and all the best finance firms and the best law firms, at age 33, coming home, like, in the fetal position. Like, when you're when it's Sunday, and you're like, oh, yes, I gotta go to work tomorrow. And, like, all that wine and shopping on Guild Group is just not doing anything.
Cannot erase it.
So that was my life. And, I watched Hillary Clinton give her first concession speech. And she had this line where she said, just because I failed doesn't mean you shouldn't try too. And she just spoke to me. And I walked into my boss's office and I quit. And at age 33, I decided to run for United States Congress against an 18-year incumbent. Because I thought that was a great idea. And it was the best 10 months of my life. And of course I swore I was going to win. Because, when you run these upstart races, you think that you're going to, be Donald Trump. But I learned so much in that race, and of course I lost, and I was broke, and I was humiliated, and I pissed off everybody in the Democratic establishment, and I had no contingency plan, but I was free. In that moment, and in that, and I always think the thing about failure is to have a plan, because I think for a lot of women, failure breaks them, because for so long they had done everything right. I think about my son's swim class. I would say, I have a 22-month-old son, and he's got a whole crew that he's learning swimming with. And when we're teaching the girls to swim, the parents are like, "It's okay, honey." You know what I mean?
you don't need to get your face wet. Don't worry, don't cry. And like with the boys, at 6 months, the mom and the dads are just pushing them in the deep end, right? Because you're teaching them at that age to be a man, to be fearless, to take risks. And so they know at 6 months, 10 months, 2 years, 10 years, 20 years, what it's like to have how I felt that day after my election, right? I was just on the floor. But they've mastered that because failure, it's a muscle. And they've learned how to exercise that muscle. We have not. And so that race for me, I learned that, and I started exercising my failure muscle. And I started an organization to teach girls how to code when I don't know how to code, right? And that felt normal and okay. I didn't think about it. I didn't talk myself out of it, right? All of us have ideas and we talk ourselves out of it because we think we're not an expert, or we don't know anything about it. When men don't know anything about anything and they still start talking. Right, all the time.
Right.
And so now I'm free. And I think motherhood has freed me even more.
Yeah.
Right? And I want to, talk about this a lot because I think it's really important to give that gift to everybody about failure and risk-taking and bravery and imperfection.
Mm-hmm. I want this panel to go on forever. I want to take you home in my pocket. So we had a question from some of the folks who knew we were tuning in tonight, and I thought this was really interesting. Knowing each of you are, in your own business experience, what best practices from business do you wish we actually had more in government? Like, what are some of the things that have worked for you entrepreneurially or in business that you've seen that we may not be seeing in government?
I think for me, it's letting everybody know the moment that I walk into the room that you're getting 100% Denise. I can't be anybody else but me. I'm a black woman. I'm a mother. I'm a daughter. I'm passionate. I'm blackity black. I am really, really focused. I'm a hard worker. And I speak my mind and I tell you what's on it. And I think all too often in government, we kind of, no matter how big my voice is, I'm invisible. In a lot of different places, I'm invisible. I blend in. People don't see me, and they don't try to hear me when I'm talking. And at age 48, I've learned to not care about that. But at age 38, at age 28, that was a problem for me. It kind of made me shrink. And so I think what's important in terms of politics is what we talked about earlier about inclusivity, and understanding that when you invite people to the table, they bring perspectives that are much needed, that they create a space for things to be done differently. I'm deeply bothered by the idea that the Democratic Party could fail so miserably, and as they seek to retool and rebuild, that black women, the ones who showed up and showed out for Hillary Clinton, are not being invited to the table. They're not being given that might show how you can get out more of the black vote the next time around in 2 years. That the black congresswoman in Pennsylvania might have some ideas on how to work the system and get more people to the polls. That the former sheriff in Minnesota, I think I'm calling their positions right, that she might have some kind of ideas on how to get folks to the polls and make some legitimate changes at the base level that could sort of open up at top. I don't know why we're still having this conversation in 2006. It's not rocket science, right? So if we are to have any kind of changes, we need to reward the people who show up, and we need to trust that they know how to get things done. And until we get there, we're going to continue to fail and fail and fail again.
So one of the things I would encourage you to do, in addition to running to look at mybrownbaby.com and following Deneen, is our friend Levy Ajayi, who's amazing, awesomely Levy, she said something to me in a podcast session we were recording that has stuck with me forever since. And I think about it in my corporate work, and I think about it in my activism work. And she said, we're done having allies. We need accomplices.
Absolutely.
And so it's a deeper level of risk, right? It's personal risk, it's professional risk, it's social risk, it's community risk. It is what will it take in whatever, and I can apply it across the board, but I was specifically thinking about the authenticity factor, the showing up and being who you are. But it also requires a community of people to be those accomplices.
Absolutely.
And to not watch passively in that way.
Just what I was going to say is, I think one of the things that has worked really well in a couple of companies that I've worked with, and something that we're doing more and more of in government, is I think a lot of times, to the point made earlier, we always look for the experience, right, or the expertise. And it's really about finding someone who's smart, passionate, willing to put in the time, is collaborative, strategic, and can build relationships. And we've started tapping people without like the traditional experience and background for certain roles to fill key roles. And I think that cross-functional training is something that would serve really well in the government, because I think when you have leaders that have been in different parts of the organization, they're going to have a bigger and broader outlook. And as they're making decisions, they're going to be able to very strategically see what's going to work, where there's synergies, where there's not. But it takes the willingness, particularly if your P&L responsibility and driving the bottom line, there's always a resistance to putting people without experience there, because so much money's on the line. And because when you're a company that, reports out to Wall Street, but having sponsors. And we've developed kind of these boot camp programs where our leaders take people under their wings and they literally shadow them and get projects and work with them to help build that trust as well as the expertise and get the broader view. And I don't know exactly how that would translate, but you just got to do it, because and you talk about technology, right? We have a lot of programs. We've got over 50 different programs for women and people of color in tech. But at the end of the day, what you have to do is be willing to fill some of those key roles that don't require super deep technical expertise with people that have a broader view and more relationships across the organization and industry, if you're going to build that pipeline and be able to attract people. Because I'm a lawyer by training, and I ran cable systems. I was not a diversity expert. I run a corporate diversity department. So it's really about wanting to do the job and surrounding yourself with really smart people that can help figure it out with you.
Any last comments? I think the other thing is, for me at Girls Who Code, I'm always thinking about how do I take myself out of business, right? Like, if I'm still running this organization, I haven't solved this problem in 20 years, like, shoot me, literally. And so we operate that way as a team. I'm not trying to build a legacy nonprofit like Red Cross and be around forever.
Right.
There's another problem, and another problem, and another problem I want to solve. And so I think government sometimes moves too slow. It's not thinking about scale and not thinking about taking itself out of business. And I think that's important. I think the point that you make cannot be emphasized enough. I think one of the things both on the left and the right that's been disappointing post the election is it feels like we're attacking diversity and inclusion and almost saying that, well, that was the problem, right? And, it's very scary to my work that we've done so much and accomplished so much over the past 6 years that we could go backwards on this, because all of a sudden it's not important to teach women and people of color how to code. And because, we should be teaching all kids to code. And so I think that, making sure that, the voices in this room, we're continuing to pound the pavement, and that we're not taking, we may have taken one step back, but we can take 2 steps forward. And that's critical. It's important now, more so than ever before.
Agreed. Awesome. Thank you guys so much. Thank you. Next time we're going to book more hours for these conversations. So in the spirit of good friends saying yes to invitations, I'm so excited to introduce you to our next solutions speaker, my friend Sarah Hurwitz. Sarah currently serves as a special assistant to the president, where she has written speeches for both the President Obama and First Lady Michelle Obama. She's also a senior policy and strategy advisor for the White House Council for Women and Girls. And prior to her White House work, Sarah was the chief speechwriter on Senator Hillary Clinton's 2008 presidential campaign and has written for the presidential campaigns of General Wesley Clark and Senator John Kerry. And so in the spirit of this conversation that we're having tonight, Sarah is going to talk a little bit about how the words and the power of our words to shape the stories as we go into thinking about how do we shape the next narrative for women and girls in public office.
Thank you so much. So thank you so much. It is great to be here. I want to thank Erin and Claire and Allison and Jess and everyone who made this possible. And before I get started, I'm actually required by my job to give a somewhat awkward disclaimer. I'm here in my personal capacity. Everything that I say represents my own views, not the views of the President or the White House. So when I speak about what I've learned as a speechwriter about telling your story in a powerful way, that's actually me speaking, not the President of the United States. I know that would have been very confusing for you all, so I just but seriously, I'm here to talk about how you can tell your story and make your argument in a way that is authentic and impactful and persuasive. So, the reality is that in today's media environment, it's really hard, right? The media environment, it's fragmented, it's polarized, it's noisy, and I think a lot of times it seems like only the most really extreme and shocking and base language really breaks through. But I can tell you that during my 8 years writing for the President and for the First Lady, I've seen time and again that the opposite is absolutely possible. I've seen that language that is inspiring and empowering and informative, that articulates our highest values, like that can break through true. I know you guys have seen that as well. But the truth is that it's harder, right? It takes more heart, it takes more skill, it takes more thought, and it takes more courage. So today I want to offer 4 tips to help you do this. I want to offer some tips to help you communicate in a way that is authentic, that's memorable, and that can actually break through all the noise. So the first tip, this is really the best advice I've ever gotten about speech writing, and it's really simple. Say something true. It's funny, it seems really obvious, but I think a lot of times when people are speaking, the questions they ask themselves, they say, okay, what will make me look smart? What will be persuasive? What will be funny? What does the audience want to hear? And those are totally fine questions, but that is not your first question. That is not your foundational question. Your first and foundational question should be, what is true for me at this exact moment? And I would actually modify that by saying, what is bracingly true? What is uncomfortably true? I'm a big fan of naming the elephant in the room when you speak. And I think that back in 2004, Barack Obama, when he was running for Senate, he did this really well in his Democratic National Convention speech. He actually started this speech by saying the following. Let's face it, my presence on this stage is pretty unlikely. Wow, well, that's the truth, right? I mean, he's a black guy named Barack Hussein Obama, and he's on stage as a keynote speaker at a major party convention, and he named it. He owned it. He said what people were thinking. I think the First Lady did this well in her 2016 convention speech when she talked about, at the beginning of her speech, about sending her daughters off to the first day of school. She talked about them going into those SUVs with those big men with guns and like their faces are pressed up against the window. And she just thought to herself, what have we done? I mean, that is a very real and a very honest moment. And I think that when someone says something that is so glaringly true, you believe them, right? And you trust them. And you're more likely to listen to what they have to say. So tip number 1 is say something true. Tip number 2 is talk like a person. And so often in politics, we hear people speaking in this, what my former colleague Jon Favreau, he calls a dead language. We need to put hardworking American family values first. The middle class is the middle of my priorities. Like, that's not English. Actually, what it is it's a very soundbitey, bland kind of language that Reagan speechwriter Peggy Noonan once wrote, makes us all want to tear our faces off and run from the room. I think if you were ever tempted to talk like that, I would really ask yourself, would a normal person say these things? And more importantly, would I normally say these things? Like, do I talk like this to my friend, my colleague, my partner? And if you wouldn't talk like that to one person, don't talk like that to many people. You'll sound fake and no one will believe you. Talk like a person. Tip number 3 is a really important one. This is show, don't tell. Okay, this is a tip about adjectives versus images. So here's an example. This is the story of My Friend John, version 1. My friend John is so obsessive. Like, he's so exacting, he's so orderly, he's really neurotic, and he's really uptight. Okay, that's my friend John. Here's version 2 of the story of My Friend John. I once left my friend John alone in my kitchen for 20 minutes, and when I returned, he'd arranged all the spices in my spice rack in alphabetical order, and he was busily lining up the magnets on my refrigerator by size and centering them using a tape measure that he carries with him everywhere. Okay, that's about images. So which description is more memorable? And that's a fake story. I don't have a friend named John who does that. But a real example, which I think is very powerful, is something that the First Lady once said. She was speaking at a memorial service for Dr. Maya Angelou, and she was talking about how much Dr. Angelou's message and example meant for her when she was a little girl. And she could have gone on and on saying, when I was a girl, there were hardly any images of black women's beauty on TV and magazines and movies, and that was really hard, made me feel invisible, it was bad for my self-esteem to not see any images that looked like me. And that's fine, right? It's moving, I guess it's fine. But instead she said this: as a child, my first doll was Malibu Barbie. Wow, that's 9 words. But what she's given you is this absolutely devastating image that I think conveys so much of what she could have said in many, many more words. So the old cliche that a picture is worth 1,000 words, that is particularly true in storytelling and speechwriting. So I really need to focus on images instead of adjectives. And the final tip, this is actually a piece of advice that the great political strategist David Axelrod, who is a dear friend and a mentor to me, he gave this advice to a colleague of mine. My colleague was struggling with a speech. David just turned to him and said, just write a love letter to America. That might sound a little bit abstract, and it's hard advice to get when you're a struggling speechwriter, but we really knew what he meant, because it's really so important to convey your love and your respect for the people and the country that you want to serve. So, when the president back in 2004 at the DNC speech, when he said, I stand here knowing that my story is a part of a larger American story, that I owe a debt to all of those who came before me, and that no other country on earth is my story even possible, that is a love letter to America. When the First Lady said in her speech this year, her DNC speech, when she talked about the story of this country, and she said it was the story of generations of people who felt the lash of bondage, the shame of servitude, the sting of segregation, but who kept on striving and hoping and doing what needed to be done, so that today I wake up every morning in a house that was built by slaves. That is a love letter to America. And you really need to find that same connection between your story and the American story, and you need to convey that same love and passion and patriotism. So, that's my advice as to how to effectively tell your story. And I'll tell you, I think these tips are particularly important for women who are running for office. Because at the end of the day, if you do not tell your story in a moving and vivid and authentic way that breaks through, others will tell it for you. Okay? And they may do so in a way that you do not like. And they may do so in a way that plays to really harmful stereotypes and biases. And I know that you'll be discussing that in the next panel. But if I can leave you with one message today, I would tell you just not to lose heart, especially at what is a very difficult moment. I was preparing to come speak today. I was thinking about how the very idea of an organization like She Should Run that helps women run for office, this would have been mind-boggling to my mother when she was growing up. And I will tell you, it would have been utterly inconceivable to my grandmother. And that's really unfortunate because my grandmother, who passed away about 5 years ago at the age of 99, she was a very proud Roosevelt Democrat, and she was really passionate about social justice. And as a young woman, she actually dreamed about going to law school and going into politics. But she was a woman born in 1912, and women back then did not have chances like that. But today, just 2 generations later, I have a law degree from Harvard University, and every day for the past 8 years, I have walked through the northwest gate of the White House to go to work every morning. So, I would tell you, while this is a really challenging time, we have a platform unlike any generation of women in the history of this country. And I think if we're willing to step up and just make our voices heard, if we're willing to put ourselves out there and tell our stories, and if we can get a critical mass of really strong and smart and dedicated and patriotic women who are breaking through and shaping our national conversation, I really think we have a fighting chance here. And that is the mission of She Should Run. It's why I love this organization. And I just want to end by thanking everyone at She Should Run for the work that you're doing. I want to thank all of you for being here to support that work, and I am really excited to see what we all do together in the years ahead.
It's so good! I'm saying Hurwitz 2020, that's all I'm saying. Incredible. Well, it's an amazing segue to our final panel, which really is about how are we going to shape the narrative. So what do we do now? We've talked about risk, we've talked about failure, we've talked about investing in all women, we've talked about a better way to tell our stories, we've talked about the impact that we know images, language, and leadership have for our next generation. Let's talk about the elephant in the room. Let's talk about the big M elephant. Let's talk about our media, and let's talk about how we're going to start to shape that narrative in a different way. So this panel will address the use of media as a transformative tool and how we can all collectively, because we are all social media citizens here, reimagine the narrative of women in leadership. So we have one slight adjustment for our panel, because unfortunately Congresswoman Cheri Bustos is doing her job, fighting the good fight. There's some things going on, so she can't come tonight. But we're going to wing it. I don't know where Allie is. Are we good to go?
We've got two Soraya and...
Awesome. And then I may ask Deneen, can I ask you to join this panel as well? I'm going to have Deneen have a reprised role here. So we know Deneen, we love Deneen. I'm going to have Deneen join this panel on media. And then I want to introduce our panelist, Mindy Finn. Mindy, where are you? Here she comes. Hi, Mindy. Mindy, yay! Come join up here, friend. Mindy is a former vice presidential candidate for the Independent Party this past election. She's also the founder of Empowered Women, an organization aiming to give voice to a new generation of American women who deserve an equal opportunity to live a fulfilled life. Amen, sister friend. And then I want to introduce you to my friend Soraya Shamali, who is the director of the Women's Media Center Speech Project. There you come. Where she works to expand diversity in media and tech. She's also a powerhouse on Twitter and in so many other areas of her life, and she's been named by Elle Magazine as one of the top 25 inspiring women to follow on Twitter. I would say after this panel, you're going to want to follow her in all life. Thank you guys for coming. So Sarah kicked us off beautifully with the conversation about how to tell stories that are true and that are authentic and that elevate our narrative. And we have watched in this election cycle in particular an incredible narrative emerge around women. And one of the things that stuck for me from Sarah's speech was that if we don't tell their stories the way that we want to, media and others will tell them for us. I think sometimes even if we do tell our stories the way we want to, there's like a plethora of trolls and others who will still try to tell the story for us. So I want to start with you, Mindy. Having put yourself out there as a former vice presidential candidate, I want to talk a little bit about what was the media coverage like for you, and what did you experience? Where did your role as a woman interfere or enhance in that conversation? And any advice, because we've got some folks in the incubator program here for She Should Run, advice for women seeking public office about how to navigate the media narrative, again, around women, and how you handle that as a candidate.
Sure. Well, thank you, and thank you so much for having me here. It's a real pleasure. I'm a fan of the work of She Should Run. It's very exciting. So just to kind of back up a little bit, because everyone may not know this, the way I became a vice presidential candidate was I was not planning to run for vice president this year, or maybe ever, but Evan McMullin, who is an independent presidential candidate, asked me to be his running mate about 6 weeks from Election Day. And so I joined for the last 6 weeks of the campaign, and we did go on, and we actually got 22% of the vote in Utah. There was talk in some polls for a while that showed we could win Utah and actually get electoral votes. And we were on the ballot in 11 states, and a write-in in 30-something other got about 1 million votes nationwide. So we were both people who have largely worked on the Republican side, but could not support our nominee. And largely that's why we ran, to give voters another option besides the two major party candidates. So I will say, as a woman, it was really an asset in many ways. It created, it opened up new opportunities for our campaign. That's not why I was chosen, but it certainly opened up new opportunities. The timing was prescient in that I was announced on a Thursday, and on Friday the tape came out that showed Donald Trump talking to Billy Bush and bragging about groping women. So right away I got thrown into the media limelight, and I was a much more credible voice in speaking about that issue than the male candidate that I was running with. I also had opportunities with women's magazines and women's sites and millennial-focused sites for women that wrote profiles that really created an opportunity to tell my story, especially, and that was very important with such a short time left for the campaign. So, I felt that it rounded out that diversity that we talk about that's really important. I saw that at play because the candidate I was running with, Evan McMullen, had a certain set of policy issues and experience, and even in the CAA that I didn't have, and I had a certain set of policy experience that he didn't have in the tech sector, and we were able to combine that as well as the male-female thing, and it really created for a nice partnership.
Let's talk about the role of Twitter, shall we? Twitter. So I thought I would have my Black Twitter and feminist Twitter voices right now, so we can talk about what the hell's going on. No, but I want to talk a little bit about, we've been talking a lot about resisting to normalize hate speech in particular. And I know that Twitter right now tends to be the favored platform of conversation amongst some folks. And but I want to talk specifically about the activism on Twitter and the resisting the normalization and how we, in 140 characters by and large, are sparking movements, instigating more conversations, educating where possible. So I want to kind of flip it on its ear and talk about the power of narrative storytelling in a very short form platform like that. Either one of you can jump in. Just kind of curious from each of your respective worlds where you see this becoming a really powerful ally for storytelling in the media. I think we're seeing where some of the danger is, but how can this be a unifying platform for us?
Sure. Well, I think that despite all of the harms that they're kind of blunt force tool right now hitting us over the head, the ability to network small groups globally for activism is unprecedented. And also the ability to subvert status quo hierarchies in media. So you see that with Black Twitter, right? I mean, Black Twitter is this remarkable dynamic intellectual force that was not possible in mainstream media, not the same way. And you see that, I think, with feminism. I think that with feminism, and by that I'm coming from a completely intersectional feminist background, the strength is global. It's more powerful globally. And we see that in places like Twitter as well. I mean, Trump is our first Twitter president, God help us. And the same tools and techniques and mechanisms that were used to build white supremacist men's rights, anti-Semitic networks can be effectively used to build counter-speech networks. And we need to think about how to do that and be very deliberate and strategic about how to do that. I think most of the people who use Twitter for activism, very few of them do it in an organic way. Sometimes you see this massive explosion, like the woman who just scolded Trump. Right. She went from 3,000 followers to 90,000 in 2 hours, right? Clearly what she was saying resonated with people. But usually it requires, as either politicians or journalists or activists, thinking about how you're going to do this. It takes, I don't want to suggest that people just get on Twitter and it happens.
Right, right. I think as a former journalist, I still consider myself to be a journalist. I'm old school. I was covering Giuliani when he was the New York City mayor, and that was before Google. I think we were still using beepers. And bring it back. Right. We had to go out and talk to the players and find out facts and bring it back and write it down with approval from a whole lot of people before it made it into the newspaper as facts. And these days you can go on to Twitter and have someone just talking all kinds of crazy and have a bunch of people think that that's fact. That's the bad part. The good part is that think about what happened with Ferguson when Mike Brown was killed, murdered. Think about what happened when Eric Garner was murdered. Think about what happened with Trayvon Martin when he was murdered. Walter Scott today when he was murdered. What you find is a group of powerful voices that were out on the streets reporting what was really going on. It wasn't, you didn't have to turn on CNN to see what was happening in the streets and wait for someone to sort of filter it through this sort of CNN narrow lens. You could go on to Talib Kweli's Twitter page, and he's standing there with his phone showing you what's going on. I think there's something powerful there in citizen journalism and the ability to see on the street level, the reality, people's reality. And so I would never say that it's a bad thing, but I do think that it needs to be supplemented, right, with legit news sources, people who do this for a living, who have a background, who know how to get the facts, the real ones, and know how to be objective and balanced, or at least some semblance thereof, and tell you, what's really going on from a journalistic perspective.
How do we, as human beings and active participants in this process, not become knee-jerk and reactive in narrative storytelling? How do we, like Sarah said, become very thoughtful about telling our points of view, sharing our, true stories with people? Whereas I feel like right now everybody's so reactive, and we can be so quick to react, right? We can fire something off, or the lazy way is just to keep retweeting it or just share that. But how do we, I guess just on a personal level, how do you, especially you, Sarah, like all the stuff that comes your way when I see you post something provocatively intelligent online, all that kind of backlash that happens. How do we, if we're running for office or if we just care passionately about an issue, how do we preserve sanity while not responding immediately to narrative when you want to change that narrative right away? Is there any tool that you use to mitigate that?
Well, the first thing I would tell anybody who is engaging publicly, whether you are 13 and sharing something in Snapchat or a politician who's seasoned, is to make sure that you understand digital security tools. Nobody, but especially women in the public eye, should be out there engaging without understanding what their current reputational status is online. Google yourself, figure it out, see what people are saying, how to use things like two-step verification in all of your social media accounts. It's just really more a matter of time than whether or not something will happen that will cause you anxiety or be very disruptive to your life or hurt your campaign. We don't really live in a contemplative country that's introspective, so the ability to push a button and then share our opinions is just like a drug. And I think that for those of us who are sharing information, we just have to be cautious. And we have to be doubly cautious as women because we're more likely to be targeted for online harassment, sustained harassment, sexualized harassment, invasive harassment. And contrary to public opinion, it doesn't come mostly from anonymous people. Yes, those people are terrible and malicious, but most of the harassment women encounter, like offline violence, comes from people they know, angry exes, people they work with, students they go to school with, neighbors. That's just the reality of the situation. And so it's just important to think about what these interactions mean in a broader sense.
So one of the questions that we had from some of the folks watching tonight was about this unprecedented role right now, Mindy, between political candidates and the press, and the way that we're talking about covering elections in the future going forward. And so for Mindy and for everybody on the panel, wondering about what you see as the future of this relationship between citizen journalists, employed journalists, so to speak, and then all of us who are social media citizens. The toothpaste is out of the tube. It's not going anywhere. It's the way we communicate. It is the way we're covering things. It's the way truth is being shared or whatnot. So I'd love to hear a little future leaning into how you think this might impact runs for women in public office, but also how it's impacting our relationship to what's true and real in media and journalism. Just a big question to end tonight.
Well, I can add just a couple things on it. So I think that two things. So one is that the media plays a really important role, and I have great respect for the media. Not all in politics do anymore. But rewarding, I mean, I think it is fair for journalists who take their job very seriously and are in dogged pursuit of truth and getting to the bottom of it, that those are the kinds of journalists that, I mean, you want to be open to all, but you build a relationship with and you ensure that you're working with them to best tell your story. At the same time, we live in a world where we call it post-truth, or that there's a lot of conspiracy theory out there, right. and anyone can make any kind of an accusation on Twitter, and all of a sudden it becomes a big group of people's truth. They see it on Twitter, it becomes truth, right? And so it is really important to use your advocates. I think about what we did on the campaign. Very often we had our supporters and advocates, that we would encourage them and empower them to share the truth, to correct the record, I guess. And obviously Hillary Clinton did that. There's the correct the record thing. This is not new within campaigns. But I really think it's a combination of things. You need to use the activism and advocacy side of media to advocate on your behalf, because there's a lot of myths and incorrect information out there. Obviously, people who are trying to attack you, it's in their best interest to spread misinformation. At the same time, the media does a really important job, and they should be embraced. And I think that is, I'm very concerned about the moment that we're in right now, but we're very focused just at the presidential level. We do have an opportunity as citizens. I think it requires us to see ourselves, those who want to be out there and in the arena as advocates, more as journalists. Like, it's great that you were a journalist, because we think about, I know even when it comes to my use of Twitter, it's being a candidate in some ways helped me in this way. I think now about raising my gaze and my standards for what I've put out there, and I look at what are the things I don't like about what other people do. They spread disinformation, they are petty, they are
Threatening
mean,
to throw
they're
you in
threatening,
jail.
negative, these things. How can I make sure? How can I make sure that I do the opposite? And it's hard because Twitter's the kind of platform that, often what I might first draft as a tweet is sarcastic, and it's a little bit petty, because that's the way that's what the knee-jerk reaction is.
Totally.
But redrafting it and also making sure, wait, before I tweet this, let me make sure that I have a couple sources of information, and I think this is really true, or this is backed up and is really true.
I think that we need to hold media accountable for doing their jobs. I feel like outside of a national kind of level, on a local level, I live in Georgia, and we have one major newspaper, and they can't do everything. But at the same time, there's no reason why I shouldn't be able to turn to my local newspaper to figure out what's the difference between this senator and that senator outside of the press releases that they sent you. I just remember going into what we call the stacks at the bottom of some of the governmental buildings and digging through the paperwork and finding out where like the secrets were buried, and being able to use that to tell important stories about what's really going on with your representation, what's really going on with your government, what is Giuliani really up to. That was what we did back in the day. And I find that that's not necessarily, we're more concerned about what Kim Kardashian is wearing on her fake butt these days than we are what,
Has that been confirmed that it is indeed fake? I'm just checking sources right now.
Well, I mean, for one who has a real one. I didn't want to go there. It's hard to pick up a newspaper and take it seriously. It's hard to turn on a television and take it seriously when it seems like the anchors are all sort of looking at everything from a very subjective point of view. If I can look at you as a journalist and tell how you voted yesterday, then you're not giving me journalism, you're giving me editorial, you're giving me opinion, and you're speaking to me in that silo. And that's not helpful to anybody when they're trying to make informed decisions. Now, we can't do anything about people who listen to it and are too ignorant to think outside of that silo. There's not much. We have to figure out how to get to them. But I think that it's time that we started holding media accountable for doing their jobs and being better at what they're doing.
So I'm going to totally depress everybody. A couple of things. There's so much to say about this. One is that I worked a long time ago for Gannett newspapers and for state news, and I grew up in newspapers and then magazines, and so I have all of these sensibilities. But this medium doesn't care about any of it. And we have all these big tech companies that insist on calling themselves tech companies because it gives them relief from liability according to the law. They don't have any legal liability really for what's published on their platforms. So their financial incentives are geared towards really rewarding them for anything, harassment or the truth. It doesn't really matter. But what's really happening right now in media is that we have all these old school media platforms, newspapers, magazines, literary magazines, that all already had really big imbalances. So 65% of all bylines are written by men, 85% of management are men, 89% of them are white. And what happens is when you take those pyramids of organization and you verify them online on a platform like Twitter, which means you give them the legitimacy and the authenticity, and you give them the tools to keep themselves safer, and you give them the tools to build their audiences, that same structure that existed before is now exponentially being grown online. And that's really hard for women candidates because we know that men and women report things differently. Men don't use women's sources as much. They tend to flatten images of women and make stereotypes. There's a lot more implicit bias involved in the coverage of women candidates. And all of that's just happening now online. And one of the projects that the Women's Media Center did with She Should Run was a project called Name It, Change It, which studied the way women candidates were represented and talked about, and found that if a woman candidate called out sexism, she was more respected, which is great news, except the way sexism works today in this medium is much more diffusely. You can't call it out because it's not in your face the same way. It's in algorithmic bias. It's very subversive. Women politicians, for example, if they become powerful enough, and I'm talking about Condoleezza Rice, Sarah Palin, Hillary Clinton, Michelle Obama, Nancy Pelosi, get turned into pornography. And they get turned into pornography along with their children. And how many people here know that and have seen that in a mainstream publication? Right? So if you're a woman candidate, or if you're contemplating running, what a lot of women will say is, well, I don't want to deal with the rigors of the campaign. And nobody talks about what the rigors of the campaign mean. The rigors of the campaign include the fact that your family might be threatened, that you might be harmed, that you're going to be sexually denigrated, that you're going to be objectified in these ways. But mainstream media doesn't cover that because it falls into the realm of sex, pornography, women, private things that we don't think are relevant to the proper functioning of democracy. And if you are a woman candidate, you need to have the centeredness and the wherewithal to stand up and say, you know, every man next to me here, if you Google your name and the word porn, what we get is opinions, your opinions about porn. But if you Google my name and the word porn, what you get is me being turned into porn. That's what calling out sexism means today. And the other thing, too, is that we're talking a lot about Twitter, but Twitter's just one node, right? All of what we're talking about happens across multiple platforms. And there is no central way of dealing with that. You're basically playing with whack-a-mole at all times. And so I think that one of the best, if advice is useful, this idea of understanding how small world networks work, everyone contemplating running should really understand the science of small world networks because they're working across platforms against you. You might as well use them in your own favor. And calling out sexism is more complicated but really important. And you can use media like Twitter to do that. But you need to brace yourself for the blowback because it can be massive and invasive. And I mean, look at this ridiculousness happening with Comet Pizza. I mean, really, you know? And so one of the good things about the internet is it forces the dissolution of the boundary between public and private that has always protected male violence, that is used to silence women politicians. And so we should use that for that purpose.
I think what you're saying is really important. While it may be depressing, I think it's really imperative that we understand the systems. We started off our conversation tonight talking about we can't change the system if we don't understand the system at play. And I think that all of us, especially those involved directly with She Should Run and the supporters who are here tonight, and the people who are choosing to go through the incubator program and thinking about running for office, know that there are so many layers of which we can attack and address this conversation. But at the base core of it, what I am taking away from the collective conversation tonight is that we have choices to make in the way that we share content, in the way that we create content, in the way that we share information and look to invest in, as Natalie said, sort of in women as across the board and not just in particular categories. And I think I take a little bit of solace away from that we all sit on our own individual media platforms. Some of us in this room have larger followings than most major corporations. And to talk about how do we wield the power of what we have in front of us now, and most importantly, how do we speak truth to power about how to get more women feeling comfortable even in the discomfort of the system? Because for us to look at the system and then walk away does no service to that changing the parity space that Natalie talked about 170 years from now. It doesn't accelerate us any faster if we look away and say it's just too yucky to look at, so let's not look at it. But what Maria said about taking risk within whatever business you're in, whatever relationship you're in, whatever platform you're on, whatever political aspirations you have, that individual power and spark, nobody can take that away. And in fact, I think you heard it the best from Christian and Samantha earlier in the program, which was that at 13 years old and 15 years old, you've got young women visioning themselves and applying themselves into positions of power and influence and leadership. And as Sarah said in her piece, that will change the next generation, and it'll change the people all around us in close proximity. I think the power of storytelling is so important. The power of this conversation is incredibly important. And with that, we are at the end of our program for this evening. So thank you guys for watching at home or in your office on live stream. And I will turn it over to Madam Maggie, who's the head of our board, to talk about the rest. Thank you guys very much.
Great job. Thanks. A big round of applause. Thank you. And a big round of applause for Erin and Claire. Where's Claire? Did we lose her? There she is. Was it a great program? And Jess Wiener, the world's penultimate moderator. She could moderate her way through an empty room. We had some staff that was fantastic tonight. Allie, Lucky, and Jen. Stand up. Thank you. To our energetic signers who are now exhausted and are looking for coffee on 14th Street. Can you imagine signing this content? I mean, it was hard enough to follow it. Auditory, can you imagine signing it? So thank you very much for that. I'm the chair of the board. That means I work for Claire and Erin and everybody else. But we do have some other board members who are here, and I want to acknowledge them because they give a lot of money, they give a lot of grief, they give a lot of guff, they give a lot of ideas, and they're fantastic. Linda Frankenbach. Yes, Leader. And Natalie, did you make it down? There you are. And we have a very global, fabulous international board, a lot of which are stuck in New York, and they're watching us on live streaming. And we wait for your criticism tomorrow morning at the board meeting at 8 o'clock. I know you're all copiously taking notes. We do have a reception right after this. Again, having all this fabulous, stimulating content would be nothing without a dialogue afterwards. We heard about telling stories. We want to hear your stories. We want you to interact, to talk. We have a lot of wine and food, so we can make you lugubrious and conciliatory and easy to get along with, as people would like us to be. So please join us for the reception. Also, the Oprah moment. Please, under your chairs, you will find a Dodge Dart. No, you won't find a Dodge Dart. But you will find, we have very, very generous sponsors, not the least of which is the Mattel Corporation that gave us our first presidential and vice presidential Barbies. They're under your chairs. Please take them, give them to whomever you think would find them meaningful.
I mean, word on the street is that they're collector's items now. Just want you to know.
They are collector's items, and I also want to say that after She Should Run joint ventured with Barbie Mattel to roll these out, Mattel beat its earnings. And they said in the shareholders call that this doll was one of the reasons their earnings were so good. There is power. There's power in this. Also, this will be the last sales pitch. There is She Should Run swag for sale out in the lobby. All the proceeds go to She Should Run. We have 4,000 new women sign up to run as candidates. We need to be able to support that effort. So please think about the swag. It's really cool. Finally, I just want to go over just quickly what She Should Run did in 2016. It was an amazing year. We published a book, which is also in your swag, called See Joan Run, on a joint venture with a very famous advertising agency, which I've forgotten the name of. What is it? What's it called? Geometry, right? Which is a part of Open. Okay. It was a runaway bestseller on Amazon. You have a free book underneath your chair. Take it. That's just one thing we did this year. We attended both conventions. Yes, both conventions. We are nonpartisan. Okay. It was hard to go to both conventions. It was hard for some of us, but we went. We went and we learned a lot, and we were very successful there. We have a program called Ask a Woman to Run. Very successful. Obviously, the Barbies, and of course, the She Should Run incubator, which helps women get prepared to run for office. Thank you. Go talk, go drink, and go forward and be positive.
All right.